Okay, so for this exercise, we're going to work on our square or corner seam with a facing. So you might see this on a square neckline or possibly a square pocket opening where you would need to have a facing, and that's a separate piece that's sewn on and then turned to the inside to create a clean finish. Now you notice that the grain lines are straight here on the outer edge, and that I've got all of these notches, and these notches need to be clipped. We're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if you need to measure, this is our seam allowance here, and we're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch. So again, our notches that we clip out of here are going to be half of that. So we can only clip in here about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and do that really quickly. So when you clip in the fabric, just make very short clips to actually line up the two pieces. Now, this is the self, this is the body of the garment, and then this is actually the facing, and it says cut one fusible. So I'm going to cut one of the body fabric, which is here, out of self, and then I'm going to cut one facing, one self, and then one out of fusible, which is also interfacing. And we're going to use the Pellon Easy Knit EK 130, which I've used for all of the exercises that call for interfacing. So we'll get to that in just a second. So there's also another information here on these pieces, and you see RSU, and that means right side up. That means that when you cut these out of the fabric, this pattern piece has to remain the right side up with all of the information up. You cannot turn it over to save space, especially for the facing. So these notches line up together. This is the face side. When I sew these together, I need to put the facing sides together and then sew them. If I cut them out this way, that means that this is the face side, and it won't work. I can't get it to fit in here. The notches won't line up at all, you know. So we have to cut these RSU right side up, which means sometimes we won't be able to save as much fabric as we would like to. So we'll kind of fit them in there the best we can for butting up those lines, but they have to be cut with this going up this way with all the information on the top side. So let's actually get to cutting these out. Okay, so now that we have all our pieces cut and clipped, let's mark for the face side before we forget. So if you need a reminder, go ahead and lay your patterns on your fabric with your right side up so you don't forget which way is the face side. So I've done that. Now I'm just going to mark some lines. All right. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention before, what should have popped up while I was cutting the fusible, is that when you cut the fusible, you will need to make sure that the textured glue side is also right side up. So that glue side needs to be up when you place your pattern piece on it to cut it, because we need to fuse the wrong side of the facing piece. So I would need to put this down here on the wrong side, and then we'll fuse it to that piece, and then we'll be ready to sew. So the first step in this exercise is going to be fusing the interfacing to the wrong side of the facing piece. And then we'll be able to match the notches to sew this corner seam. Okay, so I've got my square facing. I've got it all fused here. So now I just need to match it to my garment piece here. So I'm going to match face side to face side, and I'm going to match my notches here and here. So I just need to flip this over, make sure I'm getting it face side. And then, of course, I need to match this notch here. And then I'm matching this notch up here. And I'm just going to take a couple of pins here, and I'm going to pin perpendicular to the seam. And I'm putting these pins here kind of right where the notches are. Now, if you're unsure about this corner, what you can do is you can put a pin there, but I'm going to put it diagonally, right? Because when we sew here, we'll take the pin out in enough time, but when we sew here, we're going to sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to pivot at the point here where the two seam allowances meet. All right? So what I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to actually mark that point. So I'm going to remove this pin really quick. I'll just put that aside. So I've got my erasable pin. I'm going to show you exactly where we're going to pivot. So I've got my ruler, and I'm lining it up here at the edge at 1/4 inch. And I'm just going to make a mark, maybe an inch long there, and it goes past this other point. So then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, marking my 1/4 inch seam allowance and probably making another 1 inch line. So you see this point right here where those intersect, that is where we're going to put our needle down to actually pivot to be able to go this other way. All right, so with that done, I'll go ahead and put the pin back just to keep everything together so you understand exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to start up here at our notches, 1/4 inch, sew down to this point, put the needle down, lift the presser foot, pivot the fabric, and then continue to sew our 1/4 inch seam to the end. Okay, so we're ready to do our square facing, sew our facing to our square corner, and all it is a 1/4 inch seam, pivot here where we marked, and then we're going to continue sewing the 1/4 inch seam to the end. But then we're actually, since this is a facing, we're actually going to be doing the understitching. So I've got this all lined up and the notches all matched. So I'm just going to sew my seam, and I'm going to backstitch to start to hold everything together. And I'm going to sew down my 1/4 inch seam, and remember we marked it right here, so right at this intersection, this is where we're going to put the needle down and then pivot to go back in. It's kind of an L shape. So I'm coming up to that. I'll remove the pin, and then I'm going to sew up, right? I'm getting close, so I'm just going to hand turn, and I'm about a 1/2 stitch away, so I'm going to lift the presser foot so I can get that needle right in my spot. Make sure the needle goes all the way down, and just about as it just starts to come back up, that's when you want to lift the presser foot and pivot your piece, and see how it makes a nice 1/4 inch. I'm right there at the edge of the foot, and I can continue sewing. And get ready to backstitch at the end. All right. Take this out. I'm going to clip my threads. And both of them all clipped up. Do that as you go along, keeps everything nice. All right, so now we've got this sewn. Let's have a look at the other side. So we have a really nice corner. We're not going to clip that. On the other, in level 1, we did a square seam and a corner seam when we clipped it as we were sewing. But then this one, we're not going to do that just yet, right? This is a facing, so we're going to actually do our understitching, and we're going to do that in two parts. So right here, this is where that corner is. You can kind of see where that corner is because you can see that stitch. I like to fold this over on any kind of corner, do the understitching, and leave about 1/8 of an inch away from that point. So I'm going to mark that so you can see it. So this here is the corner point. And so about 1/8 of an inch away is where I'm going to mark. And that's where I'm going to stop my understitching. And so I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So fold that over, right? Because we're going to be stitching the seam allowance to the facing. And this is that corner point. Now fold that over about 1/8 of an inch away from that. And that's where we'll stop or we'll begin. We don't want to go all the way to the corner because there's all this fabric, and we don't want to clip that out first because it will weaken that seam. Remember, the understitching is to help keep the facing away from the garment, but also to add stability. So now this one is a little bit easier than the curved. So I'm just going to fold this over that seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch right here again about 1/16 of an inch away from that seam. Get started with a back stitch and just make sure everything is folded evenly. My mark is right here. I know it's hard because I have a wavy line here, but we're going to stitch up. I'm going to go slow a little bit so this is faster. Now we're going to go slow up to that point. It's right here. And I'm going to put the needle down. That's where it is. Before it comes up, I'm going to hold my reverse lever, and I'm just going to back stitch because I don't want to go beyond that point. And now I'll take this out, clip both sides. I'm going to clip all these threads. Okay, now I'm going to fold this over, open this, and I'm going to fold this side over, right? You can kind of finger press it, and this is that mark that I made, 1/8 of an inch away. So we're going to fold that over the seam allowance, and that's where I'm going to start. We could come in this side if you want to and go up to that point, that's fine, but I'm going to keep it this way because that's the way it's a little bit easier for you to see what I'm doing. And I'm going to start right at that point, 1/16 away. So I'm going to put the needle down there, and I'm going to stitch, and then I'll back stitch. So I did 2 stitches forward and 2 stitches backwards. That's my tack stitch, and now I can complete the understitching and get ready to back stitch to tack it down. And now we'll take this out. I'm going to clean up these threads, clip this here, clipping this one, and then underneath. All right, so this is what it looks like right now, and yes, it's giving me this pucker, but eventually it's going to turn in and give us a square seam with the facing. We need to come in here and clip that. So I'm going to do that over at the pressing mat. Okay, so we're ready to finish up our corner or square facing, but we can't turn this to the inside yet because we have some tension here, and the tension comes from this corner. We didn't clip it. So under here, if we look at this, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clip in this corner straight here as close as we can to that stitching. Now we would want to do it on this side because that's where we can see it. However, we want to actually clip on this facing side because we want to make sure that we're not going to clip into that facing. So I'm going to take my scissors and at that corner point, diagonally clip to that point. You see it relaxes right away, right? And then of course make sure that you don't actually clip through that stitching. So without clipping anymore, and we flatten it on the inside, you see that that clip just relaxes everything. So now we can turn this to the wrong side, right? And we still have a little bit of puckering. Why do we have that puckering? Well, let's look underneath. I didn't clip exactly to that stitch, but I'm worried that if I clip any more, that it's going to clip out. We're going to get that stitching. So what I'm going to do is I can steam that out. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to flip it to the inside, and I'm actually going to press down each of my stitching sides. right? I don't want to press those wrinkles in. Now I've got this other side here. I'm going to press on this side. Then I'll flip it over to the front side, and that's actually already better, right? So there's no puckering now. So now I can actually do a final press on the face side, and look at that corner. Look how nice that corner is, right? And everything is nice and relaxed. So now I can actually, I'm going to do this on the inside. I'm going to label this corner square facing with understitching, my name and the date, and it's all ready to go into your notebook.